And we're live to discuss the episode in the title, which is the final episode of Season 6 of Homicide, Life on the Street. Over to Jeff.
Yes, that is episode 23, Fallen Heroes Part 2, written by James Yoshimura and Joy Lusko, and directed by Catherine Bigelow. Originally aired May 8th, 1998 on NBC. And once again, Mr. Morris apparently gave up towards the end of the sixth season, so we don't have anything from him. But I do have a Wikipedia summary and a few other people's reviews on TV.com. So, picking up where we left off last week. As Ballard, who was hit in the foot, and Gardy, who was hit in the chest, are rushed to surgery, Giardello declares all-out war on the Mahoney crime organization of arrests and raids. In one raid, Georgia killed by her own panicked employees. When one fleeing suspect aims his weapon at Pembleton, Frank draws his Glock as well, but hesitates long enough for the perp to fire a shot. Bayless shoves Pembleton out of the way and is hit by the bullet intended for Pembleton. Meanwhile, Stivers tells G about her suspicions that this entire sequence of events is somehow the result of Luther Mahoney shooting last year. She also reveals that Mike Kellerman did not shoot Luther in self-defense, as he claimed. So G orders Falzone and Pembleton to question Kellerman about the shooting. After a lengthy interrogation that seems to be getting nowhere, Pembleton observes Kellerman's body language and realizes that Luther was armed but had his gun lowered when Kellerman shot him. Kellerman is ordered to turn in his badge and gun as Pembleton turns to the side and says he can no longer stand to look at Kellerman. Kellerman eventually admits to what happened. Later, he has a private discussion with Lewis while still in the box and asks Lewis if he can have his gun for a minute while Lewis leaves. Lewis smiles sadly and says, "I can't do that, Mikey," before leaving him alone. Kellerman has a discussion with G, who says that if Kellerman stays with the force and attempts to fight charges that he shot Luther illegally, a jury could very well acquit him under the circumstances. However, even if he is cleared, the reputations of Kellerman, Lewis, and Stivers, all of whom were on the scene, will be forever tarnished, and they will certainly be fired once their false reports for the shooting come to light. On the other hand, if Kellerman resigns on the spot, then G will consider the matter closed, and Lewis and Stivers will be able to keep their jobs. G and Pembleton visit Bayless in the hospital. Pembleton, who in the past had repeatedly expressed a disdain for both friendship and God, breaks down and prays to God that his friend's life be spared. The combined strain of Kellerman's interrogation and confession and Pembleton's own worry over Bayless's nearly fatal shooting motivates Pembleton to hand G his badge and resign over the lieutenant's protest. Kellerman's decision is not revealed until the end of the episode, in which he gets into a confrontation with an irate customer at a bar. He tells the man he is a cop and reflexively pushes back the front of his jacket to show the badge clipped to his belt, but is no longer there. The man laughs at him, and Kellerman's face floods with shame and regret. I would say probably more embarrassment than shame.
Yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, he has an STP.
Okay, so that's the recap. Here's a few fan reviews off TV.com. GUI Tuber says, the thing that makes this episode so compelling and satisfying to watch is the very real and logical way in which the writers and actors, of course, play out the Mahoney shooting saga to such a believable and in some ways just conclusion to all that has previously transpired. The frustration of Kellerman and the rest of the crew over their inability to nail Luther, the righteous indignation felt by Kellerman, Lewis, and Stivers, and the bullet fired from Kellerman's gun that pierces Mahoney's heart. The ensuing guilt and second-guessing by Lewis and Stivers over having taken vengeance into their own hands, a very real emotion from anyone given to a true sense of justice and the belief that such matters are not for them to mete out. And then the all-out war sparked by Junior Bunk's Squad Room Massacre drives the story and all of its characters to the only really believable place it can go. This shows how well-equipped the cast and crew are to delve into the depths of the human condition and come out with something that inspires the viewer to think, reflect, empathize, and feel. It made the entire series worth watching. De Peru said, I have a list of my favorite Homicide episodes. The series could have ended with the two-part season 6 finale, and I would have been perfectly happy. This episode tied together the storylines of Luther and Georgia Ray Mahoney. Michael Kellerman finally answered for his questionable shooting of Luther, a fact that Falzone was suspicious about since the first episode of season 6. Andre Brower, a truly exceptional actor, puts down the bad guy at his wounded partner's bedside. To G. This episode is a perfect example of why Homicide: Life on the Street was and still is one of my favorite shows on television. Legalese said, I love this series and I'm in the process of watching all of them. I love it that much. This was the best episode, at least equal to the one where Kellerman shoots Luther Mahoney. An observation, Kellerman was railroaded for shooting Mahoney. Sometimes the end does justify the means. I think because he never was able to shed his own and others' perceptions of him and his part or non-part in the previous arson for money investigation, he was so angry that he almost protested too much. So unable to shed that stain, he was certain to be misjudged for shooting Mahoney. But Mahoney had Lewis's gun, and Kellerman orders Mahoney several times to put the gun down. Instead, Mahoney lowers the gun. Anyone knows that Mahoney would still be a threat, and a failure to follow an officer's directive can get you killed. Put the gun down means place the gun and out of your reach. It does not are still a threat, and the gun can still be used at a moment, raised again to shoot an officer. Kellerman's shooting of Mahoney was entirely justified, I have no doubt. Only G actually picks up on that at the end when he has Kellerman in the box. Either Pendleton realizes it but goes nowhere with it. The possibility that Kellerman could convince a jury it was justifiable, but that Kellerman would take Stivers and Lewis with him. And the man that he is, he resigns rather than implicate his partners in what really was a justifiable shooting. And there wasn't a character I didn't like. I loved Lewis's character. He was the most real to me, but he got a walk on whatever his part was that brought on the drug war that led up to this two-part episode. Rightly so, but that's what makes Kellerman's resignation so unfair. Lewis wasn't completely innocent either, and no more or less culpable than Kellerman, both because of his actions in starting the drug war that killed the Mahoney crew and his beating of Luther before Luther gets Lewis's gun, which makes Kellerman shoot Mahoney. And Falzone helped Lewis get the police information that Lewis used to spark the drug war, so Falzone's holier-than-thou attitude didn't ring true with me. Luther Mahoney and Georgia Ray got what they needed and deserved, and it was the greatest good for the greatest number. Kellerman did right. Forcing him off the force was wrong. The last review from Fracking Fracker, who said, after having survived Fallen Heroes 1, can there be satisfaction? Can the good guys win? What a silly question. There is no such thing as win when murder is involved. For an American people so drawn to happy endings, this show was not for them, and this episode in particular was definitely not for them. Instead of giving us a win with a criminal going to jail, they gave us a loss. Georgia Ray not being apprehended, then they give us another loss, Bayless being shot. They followed that with a third loss, Kellerman going down, and finally a fourth loss, Pendleton resigning. Then they send you off for the summer hiatus if you watch this show when it actually ran. Murder is a dirty business, but it's also the search for the truth. In this case, it's a truth we've known for a season or so. For us, the truth isn't even that important. It's how they find the truth that makes it compelling drama and superb television. In the end, I guess we do win. So that's what some other people had to say. Ben, what do you have to say?
I thought it was quite interesting there what that one person said, because it made me think of their type preferences. But what I would give this episode is, I will give it 9 out of 10. And 10 out of 10 if Bayless dies.
So you're doing like the credit card transactions when they do tips, where they like reserve a certain amount for the tip, you know?
Yeah, because it's like
you're like
at a certain
bowling where your score can actually wait on your next.
At a certain point, I get fed up of like a regular cast member who gets shot and then they recover. It's like you've wasted my time. It's because, like in other, so for instance, it's almost like the Game of Thrones effect, where you kill somebody off and move on, and because it's them, you start thinking, oh, who's going to die next? You don't know who's going to die next, and there's only a few people you can work out who can't really be written out of the series. And
well, of course, on Homicide, we've already had Grissetti and Felton die.
Yeah.
Both of them, the death was off screen when the actors were no longer on the show, but that did happen.
Oh, yes.
So it's not like everybody's always recovered.
She had a great line, Laura Ballard. You are a vision in intravenous accessories.
Yeah.
And she delivered it well too. I thought that the drama, the interrogation scene, the scenes between Lewis and Pemberton were well written and well acted. I think that Kellerman is inconsistent in his line ability. where, where he gets caught out a little bit. He should have just denied it. With his, with that thing with the hand pointed down.
Yeah, well, I think it showed that.
I mean, Morgan would. If Morgan did something like that, he'd get out of it.
Well, he would have taken different actions than Kellerman several times, which Morgan has been quick to point out. And of course, he blames the writers. And to a certain extent, so do I. Although it was Reed Diamond's choice to leave the show, so they wrote an exit for him, and it was the most plausible one I guess they could come up with. But I still felt in the moment of Kellerman being asked into the box that he wouldn't have gone along with that. That he would have just been like, whatever, and walked out. He wouldn't have agreed to that interrogation. But I suppose what the writers are saying is they feel that Kellerman has enough, that he actually did have his own personal apprehension about it enough that he sort of allowed himself to be in that situation. That he's fought it for so long that it was sort of like he gave in, and because of all of the, there may have been a real fear in him that what happened with Junior Bunk would happen again. That basically, like, he was putting everybody's life in danger, and he may not, it wasn't a long thought out process. In the scene, but that kind of thing may have occurred to him many times leading up to this, and when all that happened, what I can surmise from the way they decided to do this is that there was something in Kellerman that he allowed himself to be in that situation as opposed to fighting it, because we have the contrast where Lewis has the lawyer in there at first, but then dismisses her because he doesn't really want to be, against his fellow cops. He doesn't want to be like the line to be drawn there where he can't talk to them. But he does want to protect himself. And Kellerman, of course, goes in there all guns blazing, no pun intended, with the, I don't need anybody, I can stand up to whoever, with, but then he ends up being the one that really caves in terms of what he says.
I mean,
that part was a good look into their characters in terms of how they handled that.
I mean, arguably, Lewis is a bit more culpable because, like, he started a drug war and stuff where a load of people died, and as one of the reviewers said, they gave him a little bit of a walk in that, and it was the drug war that sort of rebounded with. Although, one of the, part of it is like when we've talked about typology before, and like so with the character of we think Kellerman fits ESTP quite well, and is also in the role of a public servant, somebody who is, what I mean by that is someone who is serving the greater good. And so it's like, putting away the bad guys, that kind of thing. And so we could say that, in functional terms, if you want to tag it, that like he's an ESTP with more FE than average. And remember when we had that episode where we compared him to his brothers? And so, and like he was in the, and those episodes where he had that big thing about his honor, didn't he? And being thought of as dirty.
Right.
And that thing where he was going to commit suicide because people thought he was dirty.
Well, I don't know if it was entirely because of that. I mean, that was a factor, but
sorry, I was inarticulate in that moment, folks. That was a part of it, but he was, and so sort of like Kellerman's honor and sort of like purpose is sort of like something that's a little bit more than, say, if you were to read a lot of profiles of ESTP, this is not the thing that's going to be included in a lot of ESTP profiles.
That goes back to something we've discussed before, is the whole nature nurture thing with how much is your background and the kind of environment you're raised in, and they established basically Kellerman had guardian parents that probably instilled, some of that in him, whereas even as an artisan, he still had that influence from his parents, and he was the oldest and sort of, had that sort of natural oldest child thing with taking care of his brothers somewhat. So by contrast to his brothers, he seems less of a stereotypical artisan.
Yeah.
But you factor in his, his environment, his parents, and the role he sort of had in the family, and it makes sense for him to sort of always have an internal conflict there between the side of him that sort of does want to believe in honor and authority and the side of him that fights it.
Also, you have this thing where it's almost like people take on the values of like their environment that they're in. So, for instance, you had these journalists that when they became embedded in the Iraq War, they sort of lost the first and second Iraq wars, where they sort of lost their objectivity because they're part of the team, and they took on the values of the troops that they were embedded with. And he's sort of within there as a police officer, and he's like, it's like, how G talks about the values of the unit and supporting your fellow police officers. And so that's one of these things that's sort of going to work across types. And, if there's a good camaraderie there and people are going to work for the team, and because it's them against everybody else, and they're looking out for each other, and so that might change things, I suppose. So it's hard to say. I mean, at a certain point, it's very difficult to disentangle nature and nurture from someone. To say 70% this, 30% this, and what the exact.
Right. Yeah, but I think it's getting back to the television show aspect of it.
Yeah.
It's a well-written character when you show somebody that's not a stereotype, that they have those different elements to them, where you can see some of both. In terms of, you can see his natural-born temperament, but you can also see the influence of his family and other things.
Yeah, and also, I mean, and even if you start looking at functions, ESTP as a psychological model has tertiary FE, if folks want to look into that. But this is a review, not really a typological lesson. But if people want to look into that, the idea being that ESTP is the theory in socionics, at least, being that they don't have, that their ethics more come from the outside than from inside, and they sort of do it to please the group, but in order to, so that, in other words, they play to the crowd. Like Donald Trump plays to the crowd. And so that sort of helps them to fit in and move around because they're so adaptive in what, in their positions and ethics and things, that they play to the crowd. And so there's not those guiding principles as much, like with, say, SFPs. So for instance, you see that with Lewis. He's got these principles that he will stick to. And and he'll stick to them even if that contradicts, where it contradicts and goes up against the others. But he's going to put his principles first in certain situations. Whereas ESTP, I mean, generally it's the principle depends on the circumstances and things like that. And I think you've talked about SPs, it depends on the circumstances, it depends on the
Yeah, I think all SPs are situational, but I think it's sort of like a tier to that, and ISFPs are like the most likely, I think, to stick to principles. So compared to NFs, they would probably still appear to be kind of wishy-washy, but they still
Yeah.
do have some things that they, kind of draw the line in the sand about. I would say then ESFP is probably next, and then the STPs, I guess, after that. I think ISTPs are the most stubborn, but I think they're maybe most stubborn in their own self-preservation rather than particular principles. I'm not saying they don't have any principles, but it's ISTPs. I think it's the most negotiable.
Right. Do you think it might be a logical thing rather than an ethical thing with an ISTP?
Yeah, and again, I wouldn't say ISTPs don't have ethics, because I do think they do most of the time.
No, they can.
That they have, I would say, in comparison, their viewpoint on ethics it appears to other types to be like very negotiable, like situation based on their own self-interest.
Yeah, I mean, like, I get this from NLP because NLP, one of the creators was an ISTP, and he's talking all the while about it depends on the situation. Don't overgeneralize. It really much is the situation. And right, that was a good answer there. That was typological gold there from Jeff, folks.
Getting back to Homicide, I think that one of those reviews I read said that he liked all the characters. Honestly, I think the character that comes out looking the worst from this episode is Stivers, who I think is probably also an ISFP. And as much as there may have been some conflict between Lewis and Kellerman and things that were eating them up personally, Stivers is the one that basically, some people could say, okay, well, she acted to bring an end to it. But even that, she does in kind of a wimpy way. She basically, it's like she puts the seed in there like there's something here, but she doesn't even really, she doesn't take the fall for it herself. She puts it on somebody else to figure that out, and G assigns Pimbleton, and they ultimately end up putting it all on Kellerman, which, of course, he took it on his personal self. But Stivers is the one that comes off like,
Yeah, but it's the writers. But I mean, we know how these things go, Jeff. But the writers want Frank in there, don't they?
Well, yeah, I don't have a problem with that aspect of it. I just mean as a character, she comes look worse to me.
Yeah,
and I don't I don't have quite as strong feelings about it as Morgan does. He calls her completely useless, but I definitely think that character. Honestly, if I'm G, I've got to be thinking maybe it was a mistake to bring her to Homicide, because I'm not saying that she's not a good detective, but she causes more trouble than she.
Yeah, and also it's also a little bit inconsistent with G's character because he's talked in the past about bumping off people that have killed police officers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so I think you can see the pain in his face through all of those scenes. And there's another great acting job by Yaphet Kotto. We've said it so many times, it's kind of, we take it for granted, but it's like he's able to get across so much just in a few facial expressions in the pain that he's feeling through these, being pulled in these different directions. And I even said at the, towards the end of that, when he picks up Frank's badge and walks away, Morgan and I were both agreeing, like, you could have called this episode G's Bad Day or something, because if you look at it from his perspective, it's like his whole squad has fallen apart in the course of a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, like, and he picked it up in a well-acted way as well. I mean, like, a bad actor would have picked it up in a bad-acted way. I mean, because, like, there were some actors who were, like, so bad, they could even, like, pick something up in a bad way. But it's, like, just the way he picked it up in his body language was, like, spot on.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing where Obviously, I don't know how many takes they did of anything or what the director said to him, but I would not be surprised if that's the kind of thing they didn't have to do any more takes. He just did it that time, and he did it right the first time.
I mean, we've both done acting, and it's like, if you're feeling it and it feels real, it's not a case of having to perfect it.
Right.
And stuff. Maybe like doing it in a different way, where it's real but in a different way, but it's still going to be real. If someone's really good, then
yeah,
they don't need to be directed if they're really good.
So as I said last week, and
get
one
your casting
of the
right.
reviews I read kind of hinted at, the way I summed it up was a satisfyingly dissatisfying conclusion. In the sense that you have, like it was said, no happy ending. You end sort of on a bleak note where everything is in disarray, and some people, they do at least show that Ballard and Gardy are likely to survive. They're not, they're, especially Ballard, but even Gardy are not in no longer in critical condition. So they do sort of have that glimmer of hope, I guess, that they're going to survive. But they leave Bayless's fate completely undecided, and the fate of Kellerman resigns to Pemberton,
I mean, it's bleak, but it's not Blake 7 bleak. It's not like...
Yeah, not quite, because, with Blake 7, as I recall, at the end of the third season, they left enough characters alive to have a fourth season.
Yeah.
And then killed them all off at the end of the fourth season. So Homicide...
hopefully nobody watches this point, but, thanks for that. Oh, well.
Sorry.
Well, not too many people will be... But...
Well, honestly, Ben, anyone watching this, obviously... is a huge fan of us and has already watched all our Blake 7 reviews, so they already know.
Yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough. Good logic there. Good TI there. You've dived down to the bottom of the ocean and found it in that trunk.
Yeah. So yeah, Homicide. At the time that they recorded this episode, I actually did know that they would be back for one more season because the network just had gone back on their earlier promise to cancel them if they didn't beat Nash Bridges in the ratings because of some other financial situations at NBC, including losing Seinfeld, that they decided to go ahead and bring Homicide back because it would have actually been more expensive for them to do another news show in that time slot. So they went with the existing show. And there are some in Homicide fandom that think they should have ended with season 6. I'm not one of them. I still think there's some good stories in season 7, even though, it admittedly is not quite at the high standard as the previous years. But there's still some good stories with it, I think. But anyway, we'll get to that in a couple weeks. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about this before we wrapped it up. But or before I ask you the same question. Because I already said, I basically discussed what I thought about, the Kellerman conclusion. They could have written it differently. I think, as I'm experiencing in the moment, like I said, I feel like I would have had the character not submit to the interrogation. But then, of course, as from a writing standpoint, you say, well, how do you still write him out of the show at that point, other than just killing him off? I will say this, one more sort of note about the production or the marketing of this episode. It was not even in the days before on-demand internet like we have now, it was not a very well-kept secret that Andre Braugher was leaving Homicide. So the promos for this episode made it seem like he was going to get shot, and so that he would probably be killed off, and that was how he would leave the show. So that was sort of the payoff of that. They could have that scene where somebody's aiming a gun at him, and you could even hear a shot, but not show that it was actually Bayless that got shot, and so give people the impression that that was what was going to happen to Pembleton. And so that was sort of a plot twist in the fact that they made Bayless save his life and Pendleton resigns instead of getting killed. So,
you see, I thought that was just a little bit of like, you know, has he properly left the series? Because if it's one of these things, oh, I'm not going to come back as a cop, and then he comes back again.
Well, without spoiling anything completely, I will say that if we watch the rest of everything that has Homicide: Life on the Street on the name of it, you will see these characters all again, but I won't say exactly how.
Right, okay, fair enough.
I'll leave that open for... it is quite a shift in the beginning of season 7, but we'll get to that a little later. But yeah, as far as you know from already watching enough Homicide, that just because a character, quote unquote, leaves the show doesn't necessarily mean it's the last you've seen of them. So.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
But yeah, I can't remember when I originally saw this, if I like how much of the behind the scenes I knew, if I knew Pendleton and Kellerman's portrayers were both leaving, or if I don't remember what I knew at the time. It's been too long. I don't even remember off the top of my head if I actually saw this the night that it aired. I figure I probably would have, but I might have had to work, so I might have recorded it and watched it later or something. I don't remember. Because I remember, it's funny because this was the same, like I said, the end of Seinfeld was right a few days before this. Yeah. And I do remember I watched that as it aired, but I had to work that day, but I got off work like basically just in time to get home to watch the Seinfeld finale. So I was very tired when I watched that. But this would have been a few days later. I think Seinfeld was airing Wednesdays at that point, so maybe it was Thursday. I can't remember. But so it would have been either the day after or 2 days after.
Yeah, finished in May '98.
Right. I mean, like I said, it was right before this because this is aired like May 8th. So Seinfeld would have been like the 7th or something like that, or the 6th, somewhere around there. Anyway, so anything else you wanted to say about this episode before we wrap it up?
I'm glad there's changes because that's good.
Okay.
Because that, I don't like it when it's like, oh, someone gets shot and then they recover. Because it's like, it has to lead to something. At least, like, for example, when there was the shoot up, it then led to something with like G taking action. And so, rather than, so there were consequences and there was development for characters, things like that.
Yeah, well, there will definitely be some repercussions from all of this for sure in the next season.
Right. So there's a
in some ways it may be the bleakest season.
Right. So there is a gap there for you, Jeff, with David B. 226 Morris having thrown the towel in.
I don't know. I mean, at some point maybe I can go back and listen to these reviews and like type up what I said, transcribe my own stuff. It's so much easier to do it that way though than it is to start from writing it. It's just too much work.
Yeah.
I'm better at talking than I am at writing. So,
although, folks, I've heard Jeff read out to me some of his Doctor Who reviews, and I thought they were very well written.
Well, thank you. I'm not saying that I can't do it. I'm just saying I prefer, like, even at that time, if I had thought of like speaking them, I probably would have done it that way and come up with even better stuff. But I think I was inspired somewhat because I was reading review threads on the Doctor Who forum, so I sort of based the kind of style I used with some of the things I already read other people do. So,
do you think it also might have been that the way the internet was at the time, you were sort of like more in text mode, and there was less talking going on like this?
I mean, because when I started those, I hadn't done Google Hangouts yet and things like that. So yeah, there was definitely, that thought process. I wasn't recording myself dictating things or anything like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
All right, so you said you gave this one a 9.
Yeah.
I will also.
Although with Pemberton actually leaving, with there being actual change, I might bump it up to a 10 because of
All right.
that. The actual
Well,
development.
We'll do the bowling score thing, and we'll hold off. We'll give both of us give it a tentative 9, and then Ben may bump it up later.
Yeah.
Next week we'll do our season 6 in review show, and we'll talk about the best and worst of season 6 and what happened during this season and what might happen in the next season and all that great stuff. So.
Okay.
So join us next time for that wonderful presentation.
Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.